So, we have covered the first part of the spinal cord, and first part was functional anatomy. Now, coming to the second segment, that is the functions of spinal cord. So, we can say broadly spinal cord, it serves three groups of functions: sensory function, motor, and the autonomic functions. Now, the sensory functions, one by one we will cover sensory, then we will go over to the motor and autonomic. Now, among the sensory, the main part is the entry of the somatic sensation, and the somatic sensation means like the pain, temperature, touch. Among the touch, it can be the fine touch or the crude touch, vibration, then position sense. All these type of the sensations in the spinal cord, they enter through the dorsal nerve root, and then the onward transmission of these sensations. After entering the spinal cord, all the somatic sensations, they are conveyed to the brain, and within the brain there is post central gyrus, that is the somatotropic organization of entire body in the cerebral cortex. So, it enters into the spinal cord via dorsal root, then ascends through these ascending tracks and reaches to the posterior central gyrus, post central gyrus, not the posterior, post central gyrus, that part of the cerebral cortex. Now, because the tracks are the collection of the nerve fibers. Okay. Now, these tracks, they are broadly divided into two parts depending on their location. If they are carried to the central nervous system via the dorsal segment of the spinal cord, then they will be called as dorsal column, and the remaining segment, they are carried not in the dorsal but anterolateral aspect. So, they are called as anterolateral spinothalamic tract, or sometimes they are called as ventrolateral spinothalamic tract. Second is motor function, and motor function is the function which, like broadly we can say in a layman language, whatever the activity we perform, we do the movement, that is the motor function. And it is the motor functions track or the fibers, it is carried via two tracks, pyramidal tract and the extrapyramidal tract. Within the pyramidal tract, these fibers, they are originating within the cortex and ending on the spinal cord. So, corticospinal tract. Then few of the nerve fibers, they are not originating in the cortex, instead they are originating in this brainstem part, vestibular part, or the tectum part, or the rubro, red nucleus part, or olivospinal, olive, or reticular formation, reticulospinal. So, all these extrapyramidal tracts, they are called as extrapyramidal because they are not falling in the category of pyramids. The fibers which are originating in the cerebral cortex, they will collectively form a tract and form the shape of the pyramid in the brainstem. That is why they are called as pyramidal tract. But there are certain other fibers, other neurons which are not originating from the cerebral cortex, instead they are originating from these different structures like vestibular, tectum, red nucleus, olive, or the reticular formation. So, they forms extrapyramidal tract and they are also ending on the spinal, that is why vestibulospinal or the tectospinal likewise. And what are the functions, different motor functions these tracts, neurons via these pyramidal and extrapyramidal tract, they perform? One is control of tone and power of the muscles, second is control of movement of muscle and joints, and third one is control of the reflexes, whether the deep tendon or the superficial reflex, that is the motor function. The third one was autonomic function. Autonomic function, as I said in the first segment of this physiological anatomy class, there are the dorsal horn, then there are ventral horn, then there are this dorsal and ventral horn is present throughout the spinal cord, but lateral horn is not present throughout the spinal cord. It is present in this segment T1 to L2 and then S2 to S4. Why? Because the lateral horn, it contains the autonomic nerve fibers, like the visceral afferent impulses that travel through the dorsal nerve root to the lateral horn. They will form the segment, like they are coming from these segment, not from the segment, they are coming from T1 to L2, and some of them are coming from S2 to S4 spinal segment. That is the visceral afferent, and autonomic efferent is that travel through the spinal cord supplying the visceral organ. So, one by one we will cover all these three functions, group of function, the sensory, motor, and then autonomic. So, first sensory. Now, the sensory, like if you can look back, go back to this slide, mainly the sensory, there are two tracks, spinothalamic tract and dorsal column tract. Okay. Spinothalamic, it should be called as ventrolateral spinothalamic or anterolateral, because the spinothalamic is, this one is also, the spinothalamic means starting from the spine ending at the thalamus. So, the proper name should be ventrolateral spinothalamic or anterolateral spinothalamic. Now, some of the authors, they say they divide these, they collectively form, say it as anterolateral, and some of the authors say anterior spinothalamic tract and lateral spinothalamic tract as separate entities. Okay. So, now we will cover these systems. So, whether it is dorsal column or ventral spinothalamic tract or the lateral spinothalamic tract, all these tracts are the ascending one, because they are the sensory one. They are carrying the sensation, the somatic sensation to the post central gyrus. That is why they fall under the umbrella category of ascending tract. Now, these ascending tract, they are further subdivided into three parts. Major chunk is ascending tract, which connects the spinal cord with the cerebral cortex, the posterior column or the dorsal column, and spinothalamic pathway or the ventrolateral or anterolateral spinothalamic pathway. Then there are very few other tracts. They will either end at the brainstem or they will end to the cerebellum. Major chunk is ending within the cerebral cortex. These two types, dorsal column and anterolateral. See, the whether we are calling it spinothalamic or anterolateral or ventrolateral, all of these three are one and same thing. Just call them spinothalamic, call them anterolateral, or call them ventrolateral, or call them as separate entity like ventral spinothalamic and lateral spinothalamic, or anterior spinothalamic and lateral spinothalamic. All these are one and same thing. The second one is posterior column. Either call them posterior column or the dorsal column, because the dorsal part is the posterior one. So, these are one and same thing, posterior column or dorsal column. Now, the tracts which start from the spine and end in the brainstem. So, depending on where exactly they are ending, if they are ending in the reticular formation, they are called as spino-reticular tract. If they are ending at tectum, then they are called as spinotectal tract. If they are ending in olive, then they are called as spino-olivary tract. Third subdivision is spinocerebellar pathways. Now, spinocerebellar, as the name itself suggests, it ends within the cerebellum, and they are called as further subdivided like ventral, dorsal, rostral or cuneo-cerebellar. So, we will cover them one by one. First, we will start with ascending tracts which ends within the cerebral cortex. Okay. And by this is the diagrammatic representation of all these, like say this part is spinal cord, this one is the medulla, pons and midbrain. So, the part which are starting from the spinal cord, and it has shown thalamus over here. See, the thalamus is, we can call thalamus as gateway to the cerebral cortex. All the sensation which are supposed to reach to the cerebral cortex, any part of the cerebral cortex, they have to travel through the thalamus. So, thalamus is the gateway for the sensory fibers. So, the part which is ending on the cerebral cortex, these two, they are passing through the thalamus. This one is the first one, lateral spinothalamic tract. It goes directly to the thalamus. Second one is anterior spinothalamic tract. It is going to the thalamus. Then there is F gracilis and F cuneatus, that we will cover in the coming slide. They are two different part of dorsal column. They are ending on the thalamus, and from thalamus they are going to corresponding part of the post central gyrus. This one, the second subdivision, that was starting from spinal cord and they are going to the different part of the brain stem, like either they are ending within the midbrain or they are ending in the pons. Okay. The third one is, or they are ending in medulla, like OVAL stands for olive, spino-olivary tract. Okay. This one is superior colliculus and the inferior colliculus, they are forming the superior colliculus, the tectum, ending in the tectum part.